On today's More Than a Test, we have Jeremy Roschelle with us, and it is a great conversation. If you're interested in AI technology, AI literacy, and what's happening in schools around AI and technology, this is the conversation to be a part of. He's open to talking about everything. He's concerned about some of the products we're putting in front of kids and privacy. He is a fierce advocate for teachers and making sure that they are part of the process in making sure that everything that is used in schools is used safely and it works. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for being here today.
So great to be here with you.
It's interesting because we had to reschedule a few times this summer, and I'm so glad we did. I wouldn't normally say this. I'm so glad we did because you have published so much and been everywhere this summer. You've been on so many podcasts talking about AI. Does it feel like it was a crazy summer for you with everything that's coming out down in education, AI, and schools?
Laura, it feels like it's been a crazy year, not just a crazy summer, but it's exciting as a researcher because, mostly nobody wants to hear what researchers have to say. And with this issue of AI, we have a lot to say because there's a long history of research in AI. And so it's great to be wanted.
It's so funny because you say researcher, and I know that that is your primary title, but really, right now, the way that I look at you is an advisor. Like, I'm watching your podcast, and it's very clear that schools are desperate for tactical information around AI. Does that feel true to you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's come over them. It's landed, and they have to figure out what to do. And it's complicated. It's not a simple thing.
Definitely not simple. What do you think is the number one question you're hearing from school districts right now?
I think the number one thing we're hearing a lot from school districts is like, how do we get everyone to AI literacy where they understand what this technology is about? And I think that's really wise because I don't see any great ways of using AI that don't start with an informed teacher, an informed parent, an informed student. So to me, putting your money into AI literacy right now is a great move.
Okay, so tell me this though. How much does a teacher really need to know in order to be a great teacher with AI?
I think they need to know a fair bit more than they probably needed to know with other technologies. Uh, we're all familiar with the problems of hallucinations, that you can get false information. And it's not obvious when you first start playing with it that that may be true. And you have so many options, and it's being packaged in so many ways that it's a very complex set of choices for a teacher to use AI well. Of course, there's many companies and services that are packaging that to make that decision easier. And I think that's really important because I think, raw use of just what comes from the main suppliers of AI, I don't think that's going to be the best choice for the majority of teachers out there. I think using something that's a little bit more put together and specific to education will be a better choice.
Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper on that because I was at ISTE this year and it kind of felt like AI chatbots puked on ISTE. Like everybody was a chatbot. I mean, there was every different version, color, whatever that you could have possibly imagined. And so, when teachers are looking at these different things, you're saying, first of all, it should be something that's tailored to education that they should be using. And then
Absolutely.
when they're looking to understand the quality of what they're looking at, what kind of questions should they be asking?
I mean, the questions aren't that hard in a way. I just recently saw online two great questions, and I'm sorry I can't attribute them right now because I don't remember the person. But one is like, how is this better than what I've got? And that may seem like a silly question, but for the areas that I've studied, like improving mathematics education, improving reading, a lot of times they're trying to do the same sorts of things that we already have solutions to. And it's not clear they're actually better, they're just newer. So that's one thing. Is it better than what I've got? And the second thing is it safe? That's the other really important question. And that safety question has different dimensions. Is it gonna use my students' private data? That's a big area of safety. Is it going to output harmful or wrong content? And that's a different kind of safety issue. And so there's a whole set of risks to think through. So each of those two big questions, you can have smaller questions underneath, but those are the two big questions. And I think the other thing I want to say up front is there's a feeling of rush, like I've got to make this choice right away. And I think something I'd love for educational leaders, like building level leaders, district leaders, to be saying is, this is going to be a long term trend. And to do the best for our children doesn't require us to do something immediately. We can take our time to answer some of those two questions well. Is it safe? Is it better than what I've got?
It's so funny that you say this because I just had two interesting conversations. I had someone say to me that what they did with their engineers that they wanted to try working with ChatGPT and some other things is they said, just keep the tab open for a few months. Think about it every once in a while, but like don't run into like it doesn't need to be everything you do. Just keep the tab open. Let's see what you do. And then for teachers, the question is like, no, get it in your classrooms now, while the engineers are just like keeping the tab open. So I think that what you're saying about slowing that down and letting it be a part of your process instead of like forcing your process, I think is really important.
I mean,
And
I
that,
personally, in my own daily life, I keep the tab open. That's a better characterization of what I use it for. Is like there are some really great productivity boosts for myself, but it's not every task that I'm using it for. It's not even the majority.
and then to your point about is it better? I was just at the school that I used to lead here in Boulder, and I was talking to probably the best math teacher I've ever known. And I asked her like, what is she using? And she said, honestly, Laura, I was hoping to use it for problem generation, but it still doesn't generate better problems than I do. Like the math problems it generates, like they're good and it's an interesting starting point, but it's still not quite the like multi-step that I needed for this, pre-algebra class that I'm teaching. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a really good question that I think a lot of people are asking, is it faster? Sure, it's faster maybe. Or is it a little bit easier? But is it better? Is a much deeper question that I think is really meaningful.
Laura, you've seen some of the stuff I've published. I've also spent some time this summer going to some really great research conferences to see what's going on in the state of the art. What are researchers doing with this technology? And across the board, what I'm seeing is they find it's a lot of work to get it to do better things. They can, but it's not the level of work that your average teacher is going to figure out at their own. For example, to get it to generate better math problems, you can do that for sure. These LLMs are super powerful, and creative people are going to figure out how to put other things around them and how to tune them, how to prompt engineer, all those things. And we will get an easier way to generate math problems. I'm sure of it. But what it takes to get there is probably beyond what the average teacher playing around is going to find, worth their time.
How far do you think we are from having something that it makes that let's just use math problems as the example can easily generate the best math problems, better than my math teacher?
That's a great question. And what it forces us to do is say, what is best here? Right.
Right.
And so, and there's things to say about that. Like, well, what are your mathematical goals? A whole lot of what we've got out there in terms of math problems are to see if you can get the right answer quickly. And that is not where we need to be with math. Why? Well, different spin on generative AI, but hey, we have calculators already. Actually, AI, if the goal is to get the right answer quickly, the future of AI is going to solve that problem. So we don't need a population of students that's doing that. What we do need much more of is conceptual understanding. They understand the math, they understand how to apply the math to a new situation to figure out how to make a good mathematical model to, like, the classic one is comparing cell phone plans, but there's lots of ones. So I think what your question reveals is people and machines need to work together. We need to own the goals of what is a good math problem. And so the question of that you asked was, how fast will AI be able to do it? And I just want to change the question to how are we going to get people and AI to work together so that we get problems that honor the direction we need students to go, which is towards conceptual understanding. And then how do we support their reasoning? For example, by engaging them in discussion of their thinking, not just checking the right answer and giving them a little feedback. We've got that covered without AI. If the goal is give a kid a math problem, figure out if it's right or wrong, give them a hint, you don't need AI to do that. There's tons of products on the market. So where we need to go is the things that build students' understanding, their ability to make sense of math.
I love the way so much of your work is around, teachers and AI, teachers and the technology. It's not just about the technology, but about the people behind it, which is what you just said. And what it makes me, think of is I read this article in April that said 50% of teachers believe that they will use AI in their classrooms this fall.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks ago, similar article came out and said 90% of teachers says they say they will use AI in their classrooms this fall in the US. Do you think the number has changed that drastically in just a few months? And
Or is
what do
it
you think?
polling error? Well,
I
it's an interesting
well, I
time. It's
mean,
an interesting time of year to ask about polling error. I don't know. I think I think for the AI literacy sense, we need teachers to play with the technology so they understand both what it can do and what it's not so good at. And with any technology adoption wave, one of the best indicators that it's going to get used well is that teachers have enough time just to get comfortable with it and get familiar with it. So I really do endorse teachers like spending some time, but I think you know how much they have to use to produce materials their students directly see versus to stimulate their own thinking. Like one of my uses of AI, we've been working on a research publication and we were struggling with a title. What should we call this thing? And so I gave it the executive summary and I said, give me 20 titles for this paper. And of those 20, like two were worth refining, and we ended up with a title. And so the AI didn't tell me the title, just like the teacher, not generally going to use it to give the student the math problem, but as a tool for creativity and to get you out of your rut. I think that's a great use for teachers. Like I've taught the same old curriculum with these same old math problems for 10 years now. Give me some creative ways to teach the same content and let me make some choices. And so I'd love to see teachers do that kind of thing where they're very much in the decision loop and not just like on autopilot or not just offloading their work to the AI.
Yeah.
And then I think we need time. I think teachers need to play at that level. And I think this whole field is going to evolve and the deeper uses are a couple years out. They're not this year.
I really appreciate how much time we spent on teachers. And I want to mention something that I heard recently. I think it was the Santa Ana superintendent who said, I realized that this year I probably need to get more um, professional development time for my teachers. Like my teachers need more planning time to work with AI or else I'm going to get the worst uses. He's like, it's supposed to save us all this time, but only if they get time to play with it. And the reality is a kindergarten teacher right now has 10 minutes in front of their computer. They don't have time to play with AI. And so I think you're really driving at that like, if we want this to be good, they've got to have time. And I think we're so focused on the time saving that we're ignoring the fact that in order for it to save time, they've got to spend some time working on it. So
Absolutely. And what you're pointing to is also reflected in US national policy. There's the National Educational Technology Plan. It's got three gaps. And the third gap, it's organized by three gaps.
yeah.
The third gap is the design gap, which means do teachers have time to be designers? And that's what you're talking about exactly. And it's calling for people to give teachers more time, not just to adopt and use, not just to check the box that it's safe, but really to think about what is the best use. And AI, generative AI, should be a tool of customization that helps the teacher personalize or customize to their students, their classroom, their setting. Well, they need some time to figure out how to do that customization. But if they do, I think there's a lot of hope there because we're coming out of an era of math math produced materials. That's actually a funny pun. We're going from mass produced to math produced materials because generative AI is all math.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm with you,
Anyway,
Jeremy.
you're probably the one person in the world who followed that joke.
Oh, and I'm going to use it later and see if I can get anyone else there. All right, so we talked a lot about teachers. Let's talk about students. And again, I'm going to bring up ISTE. And, it's interesting because, Amira, where I work, has a reading tutor. And tutoring was all the rage at ISTE and a lot of different forms. And I heard someone say this and it sounded so promising. And then I also had so many questions. And what he said was, think about it this way. If you have a kid who's trying to get good at baseball, and he's pitching wrong, right? Like whatever he's doing is like, I don't know enough about baseball, but he's throwing the ball wrong. And a coach can get in there and tell him to do it right the fifth time he's done it wrong, as opposed to the like 10,000th time he's done it wrong. It's a lot easier for the kid to fix. And the same thing with this. If a teacher's not available, but an AI tutor is available to get in there before they are doing it wrong 5,000 times, we can better fix it. But there were a lot of different tutors at ISTE and there were a lot of different things out there and everybody was kind of packaging it differently. Tell me, do you think these AI tutors are going to, fulfill this promise of helping kids right at the right moment, or should we have more concerns?
So this is a great one, a great topic. I love it because I'm a researcher, and one of the ongoing, things that have been studied with AI for 20 or 30 years is the use of AI to provide students with just-in-time feedback. And so, actually, we know from research that it works, that if you get that right, it's very powerful. It's particularly powerful if the nature of the feedback isn't just, hey, student, that's the wrong answer, try again. But it helps the students pinpoint the step that they got wrong, like where in a problem solving process, or pinpoints an action they can take without giving the answer away.
Right.
And so, on the one hand, we absolutely know that this is something that works and can be improved on. On the other hand, we know from that very same literature that there's some complexities that maybe these fresh out of the gate products don't yet have incorporated. So, the classical work over those 20 or 30 years, for example, is grounded in building a student model. So over time, the AI acquires a model of what the student knows and doesn't know. And when a student comes on a new problem, it goes back to that model to figure out what could be wrong. Well, a lot of the generative AI uses have no history with the student. They're doing episodic tutoring as if you're a dial up tutor person. And like someone calls you up, hey, help me with this math problem. You don't know anything about that student's past, present, future, just like we're in the moment. And so there's that's a kind of limit. The personal relationship with the student, the feelings of support and care. With human tutoring, that's a big deal. Like there's someone there for you week after week who cares about you. And this has lots of dimensions to tutoring. And then there's also how sophisticated are these tutoring programs? We'll stick with math, about how math knowledge grows and develops. Are they just like sometimes I think these tutors are great for a certain kind of kid. It's the kid who's just forgetting something temporarily or is just a little bit off, but is 95% on grade level. But a lot of where the tutoring need is not for the students who are very close to grade level. It's for students who are 2 to 3 years behind grade level. And the teacher can't do enough in a classroom that's mixed with kids all over to accommodate to what that student really needs. So, did these tutors know enough to go back in time in a progression of learning math and figure out where that student is and figure out how to move them forward and accelerate their progress? It's no one. Often you go to an ISTE, boy, I could be a real pain. Well, I could walk around ISTE and ask these hard
I know,
questions,
right?
right? But I think the reality distortion field, to use Steve Jobs' term, is so great right now. Oh, I have AI and it tutors and it individualizes and it provides feedback, and feedback is so good. Like that makes people's eyes gloss over and they don't think, well, are you serving my student who's 2 to 3 years behind? Are you just helping them in the moment, or can you help them over time to grow and grow and grow? Like, you work on reading. You can't help a student learn to read in one lesson. You have to have a history with that student, and improvements in reading take at least a semester to unfold, and with consistent support throughout that semester. And kids have to stay on task. So, anyway, I think there's a lot of hard questions we need
Okay.
to ask, and that would sort out the wheat from the chaff.
That's true. And you brought something up for me that I think is one more hard question that I really want to ask you about this. So, what I love about Digital Promise is I often spend time with people from Digital Promise and Owl Ventures around the same time. And I feel like Owl Ventures are the people who are like just excited. We are going to go, right? They're investing in everything. And then Digital Promise is like, well, let's see what's going to actually help. Like let's talk to teachers. Let's get some educators in the room. Like there's always a lot of research and things like that. And I wouldn't say it's slow. It's just like really meaningful. And they're both very meaningful, wonderful organizations. But
Yeah.
it's interesting. When I talked to the Owl Ventures person just 2 weeks ago, the number one thing he said that is most exciting about AI is the opportunity for equity, that like
Hmm.
it's going to be available to all kids. And what I think you're just bringing up is like if the tutors are working for the kids who are already doing all right, that's not really equity, right? It's not helping a ton for the kids who need it the most. Do you see this equity potential in AI?
I totally see the equity potential, and I think it's going to take a lot of intentionality
Right.
on our parts to realize it. One simple thing is, and I don't fault companies for this, but they have to find an audience, and they have to make a profit, and they have to get going if they have venture funding. And so, there's a natural draw to sort of the lower hanging fruit in terms of what students you can serve, and equity is always harder. And so, they're just natural pressures to, with even despite the best intentions, to maybe drift away from that intentional focus on equity. So I just think it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort of us all to ask the questions like, who is this helping? As a researcher, we ask not only is this good for the average student, but for whom and under what conditions is it good? Does it work in a low income school? Does it work with a school whose population has more than the usual number of students who are special ed students? Does it work, for students with disabilities, for students who are English language learners? And so the research, you often see positive research that something works before you see the more nuanced research. Does it work for specific populations and across the kinds of settings? So I'm hopeful, but we have to keep an eye on it.
That's a great answer. Jeremy, you've been in ed tech research forever, at least for as long as like I've known you for sure, and I've seen a lot of articles. And so I want to ask you something that's not AI related. And I couldn't find anything on this from you, so maybe this is outside your field. But there's just been so many articles about it that I can't help but ask. Um, it's about cell phone policies. California announced yesterday that they're banning cell phones in schools. I've also had a superintendent from New York come on and say, you know, if I ban them in schools, I'm not helping my kids because they're going to use it anyways. Tell me a little bit about what you think about cell phones in high schools and middle schools, just based on what you know.
Yeah, and this certainly is not my area of research expertise, but as a parent, I'm concerned. As someone who's generally involved with education, I'm concerned. I've seen in our own family that cell phone use, it's kind of both a drug for the middle school student who's so wanting to be in touch with peers and what do peers think about everything. And it can be so damaging because sort of instant cyberbullying and cyberbullying around the clock can happen to students. And I think, we, it's an interesting irony. The reason parents want to provide their students with a cell phone is safety, and the very thing that it may do is make them feel less safe. And so I don't know, bans are always a very strong and harsh step. It's like going to one end of a spectrum. And in the long run, I kind of believe that the best place to be is neither full on nor full off. On the other hand, social media is so addictive to students at this age that I think until we can figure it out better, a ban is probably a pretty good idea.
All right, that's a great answer. And I love the way you kind of package everything in. Like, once we figure it out, let's do this, but let's figure it out on the way. I think that's really
Well, we
valuable.
got to protect our students. I mean, safety is a big deal. And I think a lot of people are looking at AI. You took me away from AI, but I've heard this a lot from school superintendents and from educational leaders. I've heard, with social media, we weren't careful enough. We kind of bought that it's just going to be great. It's going to be community building. And it was, but we didn't look at hard enough at the downsides. And they want to do it different this time. They, I think I've heard this from students too, actually, I have to say. Kids are aware that they've been burned by social media, and they want to be more careful. And so you have a generation of like high school students who, if you walk into a classroom and I say, I want to talk about the safety of AI use, and let's start it by thinking about cell phones and how are they safe and unsafe for you, you get a really great conversation with those students. And I think if you had that conversation in 2005 without students having the personal experience of how cell phones can be harmful, you wouldn't get nearly the conversation you get today. So anyway, I do think we have to talk about these things, keeping our kids safe. I mean, it's the bottom line obligation of any society is keep your kids safe.
Well, keeping our kids safe, but also listening to our kids. To your point,
Yeah,
I just listened to a debate in a seventh grade classroom of kids talking about whether or not we should pay for social media. And kids were saying, like, I like that it's free, I have access to it. And then another kid said, nothing is free. The fact that,
right.
and it was so
So
well
they're
done.
sophisticated, right?
So
They
sophisticated.
know that their data is being sold.
Well, not just he understood the data. He understood that, like, he's like, someone is getting paid for the marketing. The fact that I buy that water bottle, he's like, all of those things are changing who you are. And
I
that,
think that's so great that we have seventh graders who are now so sophisticated about this stuff.
and how do we do that? How do we get it to a place where we can ban cell phones and also have sophisticated kids?
Ban cell phones and
have sophisticated kids.
Oh, well, I mean, I think these are bans in school for the
Right.
first, so kids are still going to have the phones. I think it does give, parents some leverage in the conversations to talk at least about, hey, you can't use cell phones in school. Why is that? And how much should you use it around the home? So I do think actually another good effect of schools starting this conversation is it gives parents some power to have those conversations too. But I think you can't stop kids from experiencing the latest technologies. It's hopeless. They're going to try everything. It's part of being a teenager. You're going to try everything.
Well, and it
And
brings
so, yeah.
and so it goes back to what you said, that this is why important literacy is so important in all of these fields, in AI and technology, is that if you understand it, then you can have the conversation. You understand it. I mean, we started this conversation saying that this has been a crazy year for you. This is where you have put your entire career is around education in classrooms and in schools. One of the things I read recently was that schools are going to change more in the next 5 years than they have in the last 100. It was, I think, an article in Ed Week or something like that. Did you read that? And do you think that's true?
The place where I think we're going to see the greatest change fastest is actually higher ed, because it's not fulfilling what it needs to be, and nobody's happy with it right now. There are a number of things that keep school kind of more static, and so I'm always a little cautious about the predictions that school is going to change, because it serves a function of giving a safe place for kids to be all day. It serves a socialization and citizenship function, and so I don't know how fast it will change. Um, but I don't see those same pressures with higher ed, which I think needs to change more. And nobody's happy with it. There's nobody holding it in place right now. Um, will we see change? I mean, I think, yeah, we want change, right? That's one of the excitements about technology always is technology helps people envision how education in schools can be better. And so we want to be thinking about those things. I see the word transformational used a lot with AI in education right now. And yet, like we talked about tutoring, you and I, tutoring isn't transformational. People have been studying AI for education and using tutoring as the application for 25 years. Like,
Right.
that's not a breakthrough idea. And so I don't think we have the true breakthrough ideas. I think industry wants to use the word transformational. And I think right now what AI is it's more efficiency oriented productivity. Like the example you gave, it would be great if a student had a teacher available at all hours as they're working through whatever they're working on to give them feedback. They don't. We can use AI to fill that gap. But that's not a transformation. That's just extending something we already do. So I don't I think we need 5 years to figure out what the transformation is. And it may not happen in school. Like it may happen through everyday learning, the kind of learning people do when like I use YouTube to learn all kinds of things, um, how to fix things around my house. And so I don't know if school is going to be the place where the transformation is going to start or not.
Okay. First of all, I think ChatGPT might be giving us transformational as the word that needs to be a part of our website. So maybe it's
Yeah,
like
right. It's one of its favorite words.
right. That's why we all end up with it. It's interesting to hear you kind of be like critical of like, will transformation happen in schools? Because this is what you do. Has your career been plotted to this point? Like, were you hoping, like you talked about how big this year has been for you? You've been in AI research for a while. Have you like kind of seen this coming with generative AI, and that this moment was coming? And is this why you're into ed tech, or tell me more?
Yeah, well, I'll just go back a little bit into my history. And I don't know if I'm a great prognosticator that I saw it all, but I was an undergraduate studying computer science. That was my undergraduate degree. I was fortunate to be at MIT, and MIT was doing AI, and this was 1981 through 1985. And in fact, they had Seymour Papert running around doing logo and Marvin Minsky talking about AI in education. And so these issues were live in the 1980s. And I got super excited about that because actually I loved the topic of physics, but I could not stand the way MIT taught it. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to learn these topics. And they opened my eyes to like, hey, there can be radically better ways to learn. So my career got launched from that moment, But then I actually decided I had an opportunity to go to graduate school and do AI, and I studied. It's decided I want to do cognitive science instead. That is, I think the interesting and challenging thing for me was to understand how people learn, and then we can use the technology to support that. But I didn't want to start by going deep into technology. So I've been around now. I'm spin forward really rapidly. I've since the 80s till now, there's a field of AI in education, and I've been around that. I've tracked it. The heart of my work has been on the people side of using technology, but I've been tracking it all this time. And so I think there's just tremendous knowledge from what everyone has studied to build upon. And then to get really close to the present, one of my roles as a researcher has been to run a research community for a big portfolio of awards on emerging technology that the National Science Foundation funds. That thing is called circles.org. And so starting about 2017, we started to see people bringing in new and exciting applications of AI. And starting around 2018, 2019, there was this new idea, generative AI. And I'm like, what's that? What's generative AI? And so we did have an early leap on generative AI because we were part of this exploratory research community. And that very directly led to the work for the US Department of Ed, where I've been a subject matter expert because we told them Digital Promise had a relationship with the Department of Ed. So we said, hey, maybe you want to pay attention to this thing too. And they did. And that was back in 2020. And the fact that the people inside the Department of Ed started paying attention in 2020 enabled them to have policy documents today. Because as you know, it takes a long time for something like the US Department of Ed to come along to a new technology and produce a policy document. And so it appears they did it really fast, but really, so there's a little history there. And so in some ways, yes, I do feel like I've been preparing for this moment. And in another way, I don't think I predicted it.
At one point you were talking about how school leaders want to do AI differently than they did social media. And in some ways, it sounds like you just enabled that for at least the Department of Ed. Are you proud of that moment that you got to have the DOE be more advanced and ahead of the game for something because of what you offered?
Yeah, super proud of being helpful to our country through this mechanism, and that it's been a really good relationship. It's also been a great learning experience for me because it's opened my sense of how to engage with policy. And part of the process we've been through, I've been supporting, and Digital Promise has been supporting the Department of Ed. They've been taking documents that we've worked on, and they get circulated throughout government. And you see what can happen when government actually works well. The comments on those documents from all corners of the administration really led to a lot of improvements. And I learned a lot about how to do the policy thing in a way that means something. And I'll give you just one example. Um, new laws take a really long time. And about a year and a half ago, as we were first talking about generative AI, people were saying, we need new laws. And yeah, I'm like, well, that's good, but we're going to have to wait 5 years from that. And this is happening now. And so instead, a different approach, and I've learned a lot about this, is like, let's lean into the laws we've got. We've got a civil rights law, and we've got concerns that algorithms may discriminate unfairly and harm students. Let's put those two things together and let's connect those dots. And then we don't have to wait because the law is already on the books. And it really plays into what the Department of Ed has to do internally because they have a civil rights department. Those people are not historically technology people, and they've got to come up to speed now because maybe, I don't know if this is true or not, but from where I sit, one of the biggest risks to civil rights could be algorithmic discrimination. So they can't look the other way, in my opinion, from away from technology. They really have to think about that connection. So that's been really exciting to learn a lot and be part of, like, connecting those dots. And that's something I would want school leaders to know too, is that when they think about how they're going to use AI, to take that civil rights perspective, that they have an obligation to make sure various populations of students are not harmed. And
Yeah.
and how are they going to do that? How are they going to make sure those students are safe?
It sounds like you've really been empowered, but also empowered a lot of other people to accelerate their learning and be more prepared for this AI this new change in education and in AI. And I really just want to value and appreciate that.
Oh, thanks so much.
You said something else that really made sense to me that I didn't know about you. That at one point you had kind of this moment, this decision moment about doing a higher degree in AI or in cognitive science, and you chose the cognitive piece. And it shocks me not at all, because sometimes I read your things, and the person it reminds me of, who is somewhat of a critic of technology, is Larry Cuban. Sometimes I read your stuff,
Yes.
and that's who I think of. But cognitive science, he was all about. Is Tell me a little bit more about why the people side matters so much to you.
I have to tell you a funny story that was validating for me. When I was in graduate school pursuing this path in cognitive science, I went to a conference, and it was a joint conference. It had AAAI, which was the AI conference, and cognitive science at the same location in Seattle. And Don Norman, a very famous cognitive scientist, gave the opening remarks for cognitive science, which went second. And he held up this vinyl thing that AAAI had given AI, and it was very thin. He held up this vinyl thing that you could stuff papers in that you might collect from the AI conference. He said, "Well, that's AI for you. It's plasticky, it's thin, it can only hold a few ideas." And then he held up this other bag, and he said, "Look at this beautiful canvas tote bag from cognitive science. It can hold an unwieldy collection of woolly ideas, and you can fill it till it's overflowing." I'm like, yeah, I want to be part of those woolly ideas. And so here's the thing. In order to do AI, especially back then, what people were doing is working on more like toy problems where the real humanity of the problem was being reduced to chess or to stacking blocks in a certain way. Very simplified things. And that simplification never attracted me. And what always attracted me personally, because of my own story, was how does learning work? And once you get into that question, it's a hairy question. There's so many dimensions to how do people really learn. And I've never let go of that problem. I want to understand how people learn. And I want to connect the technology to it. The technology isn't a solution to me unless it's really responding to what we know about how people learn.
What's something that you know about how people learn that might surprise me?
Well, it's hard to surprise you, Laura.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now answer the
Yeah.
question.
Well, for example, we've been talking about feedback and giving feedback in the moment, but there's a downside to that, which is that students have to learn to become self-regulating learners, that when they're faced with difficulty, no one's there for them in the moment. And they need to figure out how to deal with the feelings, which are cognitive, but also emotional, of being stuck and what they can do when they're stuck. And so it's a real challenge for technology because there's a tendency for parents and for technologists and for everyone that student is suffering. I want to make the suffering go away. I want to fix it. But there's also a value to struggle. And so there's a really challenging thing. Like, how do we honor both the value of struggle in learning something? It's good to struggle to learn something difficult. And also, how do I help students not be stuck and therefore demoralized and spiral out of learning? And so those tensions, I think, it's always a surprise to me that there aren't clean solutions, but we're always dealing with tensions.
Yeah, that's totally true. I love that you bring this up. I worked at a middle school for a long time, a really high performing middle school with really bright kids. And in 8th grade, they got to do what was called a capstone, where they could choose anything, literally. And I mean, I had to advise a project on Korean pop stars because that was what she chose. But it was one of those moments where really, really talented kids truly struggled because it was the first time in their career there was no real answer, and they were going to be stuck. And I think that that's really valuable for you to bring up. Tell me about a time that in your career that you've been really stuck.
A time in my career when I've been stuck. Oh, I never get stuck. No. Let me think of a good story here. I, I need a pause on this one. Um, yeah. I mean, I guess, for one of the things for me in terms of time in my career is there was a time when I really got my start by trying to use these cognitive science principles to design things. And I came to a point where I felt like, we had done that and people were excited about the things that we as a team were designing. We felt they were good. And I felt like, well, that's not the end of the story. I want to know is if we put these out there, are they going to work? Are they really going to help students? I really want to close that loop and come back to that. But I didn't have the tools to go and do that kind of stuff. So I think I was stuck for a while. Like, how do I not just design things using principles and like work with small numbers of kids in a couple classrooms and find they work there, but how can we scale up these ideas? And I think the answer that came out over time was just doing the work with more people, bringing in other experts, building a bigger team, um, expanding my knowledge and building relationships to people who were working already at scale. So in that particular one that I'm thinking of, we worked with a prominent center in Texas that was already doing a lot of math and technology outreach. And so they were already working at scale. And the ideas we wanted to test, they wanted to test. So we worked together. And eventually I got unstuck.
I really love that about you. And I know that about you, that you do care a lot about seeing it in action. I think that a lot of researchers are happy to kind of give it out to the world and however it goes. But I
Hey, I
know,
got my journal publication. I'm done.
right? Exactly. That
That's
publisher.
why I'm at Digital Promise, because it's not all about the journal publications for us. It's about really making a difference.
And I think that that's totally true. And I really appreciated that about you. All right. We've talked a lot about things that this summer, this year, we talked about how you ended up here, how you are, been the beacon of light, the lighthouse for us all on AI. Tell me what you're most excited about.
What I'm most excited about is exactly one of the challenges that you brought up, which is how do we use generative AI for equity? And I'm particularly excited about an upcoming project that I hope we'll have the opportunity to do that will really serve English language learners. And so that's a population that is growing throughout the US and has some very specific needs. And the cost of generating materials that would help them, the different interactional styles that would help them learn, all of those are things that we have new powers to work on and to do faster and at bigger scale. And so I'm super excited personally to pick a specific equity challenge and a specific subject matter topic and just really dig in and try to prove out this bet that we can address equity with generative AI.
Um, I know you talked a lot about math, but one of the things that you're also really interested in is like infrastructure and like just solving some of those things. Is there anything that you're seeing with AI or with products that are coming to schools that's supportive in that way?
Not so much AI, but I've been talking to a lot of technology providers. So one thing that happened throughout the pandemic is now so much learning is occurring on technology. And as it does, lots of data is generated. And everyone wants that data to be used for improving the learning. And so this is another long-term play. But what we're seeing is people starting to build infrastructure to make it safe to use children's data because you have to worry about privacy and security, but nonetheless use that data for improvement. And so that's a long-term play, but I think it's super important because if we want to get to personalized, individualized, it's another funny tension in all the generative AI is that real products in schools, when you talk to them, they don't often want to collect much data about who the student is because that's all private information. They don't want to have it because that gets them in trouble if it gets released. On the other hand, if we're really going to adapt to every student, well, how are we going to do it if we don't know who the student is? So there's some really fundamental challenges around data and achieving the promise of generative AI for equity. And so I'm involved in a bunch of long-term plays around how can we resolve those tensions and really do the right thing.
That's awesome. All right, let me tell you this. I heard the best use of AI that I've heard recently that I didn't expect, and I want you to think of either one that you didn't expect or one you think we should be applying it to. A school district needed to optimize bus routes. That kids were going on buses for multiple hours. Kids were having to go to school at like 6:15 in the morning, and so they used all their data around bus routes to optimize their bus routes, and I thought it was incredible. What's something either that we aren't applying AI to yet, or that you haven't seen it yet that we should be, or something like that that you've seen that's like, oh, that was pretty cool, and we did something neat.
Yeah, the ones that have really stunned me, and they have this humanistic perspective. I've seen a couple things where the scenario is students working together, but an AI capability helps facilitate those interactions because just because you ask kids to collaborate doesn't mean they'll collaborate well, and you can't have a teacher actually in every collaborative group at every moment. And so this concept of using AI to facilitate collaborative groups so kids can interact better with each other, it just rings all the bells for me in terms of being very humanistic. And it's cutting edge because some of it's very multimedia. Like some of these systems I've seen watch kids do things with blocks and then, give some ideas to the group of students about what they might try that they're not trying. So really cutting edge because it's using cameras, it's using microphones, but the end purpose is humanistic and it's about people collaborating better. And so that just stunned me, those examples.
Yeah, I can totally. I mean, especially because it goes back to that idea of kids getting stuck, right? What happens in your kids' groups is either like they get the solution too fast and they don't go beyond,
Or
or they
one
do
student dominates. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong in a small group.
100%, and that are easily fixed by a teacher, or in this case, maybe a bot or something like that. How interesting. All right, we are low on time, although I could talk to you all day just asking you all my questions about technology, which I really appreciate you making time for me to do today. But we have 5 questions we ask every guest, and so I'm going to ask you those now. The first one is, the podcast is called More Than a Test, but everyone hears more than a test and thinks of something different. When you heard more than a test, what did it mean to you?
Yeah, to me, I'm a researcher, so I right away it means to me more than this idea of gold standard research, that there's so many varieties of research that go into making the world better.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so tell us a lit moment. And this is a moment of you in a book that either changed your life or is a happy place for you or is a moment that you remember as a child. Do you have you in a book moment?
I'm going to do a book moment that's right now. We didn't get the chance to talk about this, but I'm a backpacker and I love to go backpacking every summer in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. And I came across this book called High Sierra, and it's just exactly what a book should do. Because on one hand, it like connects to my experience and like, oh, I've been to that place. I've seen that. And in another hand, it just totally deepens my experience of that moment and takes it into new dimensions because this author is so reflective and so metaphysical and cosmic about what he's thinking about in the mountains. I'm like, oh, that brings a new dimension to my experience. And that's to me what great reading is. It connects to you personally and it takes you beyond yourself.
Oh, that's really lovely. I was just in Maine for a week with my family and I read only books by Maine authors from Maine. And again, it was like I'd go into like the random grocery store, like gas station. I was like, oh, it feels like I'm in this book right now. It's that moment. So I love
Yeah.
that you bring that up. A piece of technology you love.
I love a bunch of technologies for making music because another hobby I have is to play around with music. And there's so many cool things you can do with music these days. So a piece of technology I love are there's all these things that emulate old synthesizers that if you want to buy a Moog from 1970, it would cost you $100,000. But there's great simulations of them. And I just have so much fun pretending I'm Rick Wakeman from Yes and playing around with a Moog from 1970. And I'm
God.
not. I can't play like him at all, but I can make cool sounds.
That is cool. And Sony, and it's so great you publish as much as you do and then also carry on these incredible hobbies. It's so amazing. I'm in awe. The best advice you've ever been given.
I was talking about some great advice to my boss, John Claude Brizard, last night, and it's advice from my grandfather. My grandfather was an immigrant to this country, and he worked in making fur coats for women. This was when fur coats were still a thing, and he had this advice which I find stunningly applicable to my life, which just amazes me because he's telling this advice about fur coats, and I have nothing to do with making fur coats. And the advice was, well, in your first year, you're trying to have this like breakthrough design. It's really high style and you're going to sell it. And it's starting to sell, and that's great. And the second year, if you're successful, that code is selling. And you're doing all you can to actually finish producing them and sell them. And then he would say, in the third year, well, what do you do now? Of course, there's even more demand for your coats. So you sell more, right? He says his favorite word, my grandfather, was no. And he used no very dramatically. So he'd swipe his hand across his face and say, no, you need to be thinking about your next design because now your competitors are onto you. And if you spend your third year just thinking about what you did in your second year, by the time you get to your fourth year, you're done. So you have to think about what's next. And I think that's some of the best advice I ever got is never stop thinking about tomorrow.
That's really it's really applicable and such a beautiful story to get there. I love it. And then last question, one book you think everyone should read.
Oh, one book. Well, in this realm of AI, there's a collection of them that are about some of the risks and dangers that occur. And I think people should read some of those books. So, one early one that I read was Weapons of Math Destruction, and has some really nice education stories in it. But I don't want to just point to one. I think look into that emerging literature of how algorithms are harming Black women, for example, and other kinds of people, and get to understand what some of those downsides really have been, because that's we're walking into a future full of opportunity, but there are some real risks, and we shouldn't ignore them.
That's really great. Thank you so much for all of your time, all of your insights, and most importantly, all of your research. I know it is informing so many classrooms across the country, so many people, and so many people like Amira, where we're building products for those classrooms. So thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been great.
Hey, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you, Laura. Anytime, let's do it again.
Thanks for joining us on the More Than a Test podcast. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. At Amira Learning, we believe every child deserves a chance to become a reader, and we're excited to be part of this conversation. See you next week, and thanks for joining.